Namaskara. Welcome to the second episode of C4C Conversations. As you all may know, the first episode was about the journey of Bengaluru from Antarctica to 1536 CE, and we saw an excellent presentation by Udaya Kumar. To continue this story about our city, today we have a presentation on the Pete and Kote of Bengaluru. These have played a very significant part in the history of Bengaluru. But first, a few words from Rajkumar Dugar, founder and convener of Citizens for Citizens. Over to you, Raj.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ಸ್ ಸ್ನೇಹ. ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಮತ್ತೆ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತ. ಫಸ್ಟ್, ಅ ಸ್ಮಾಲ್ ಅಪ್ಡೇಟ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ C4C. Tree planting near Yashwantpura railway station on land provided by South Western Railways is nearing completion. Also, tree planting work at Channasandra railway station has started. All this is being done on the Koti Vriksha Sainya platform, with which C4C is very closely associated. Another important update is regarding the new airport halt station near Bengaluru's airport. It is almost ready, and we are looking forward to commute to airport by trains becoming a reality within weeks from now. We are also eagerly waiting for the Union Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs to give its final approval to Bengaluru's much needed and much delayed suburban train system. These services will help Bengaluru tide over the problem of traffic congestion in a significant manner. As we all know, traffic congestion is one of the biggest challenges faced by all those who reside in and around the city. C4C is in continuous communication with senior railway, Namma Metro, BMTC, and traffic officials to improve our city's traffic situation. We are all passionate about our city. About 20 million people reside in Bengaluru and the surrounding towns. Another 10 million people who were born here or who lived a significant part of their lives here are residing elsewhere in India or outside India. The basic thing one must know about one's Janma Bhumi or Karma Bhumi is its history, what it has gone through. This helps us understand our surroundings better and brings about an emotional and intellectual connect, which is essential for us to try and improve it as citizens. So, this program is for you wherever you are if you have anything to do with Bengaluru. After the highly educative and well presented talk by Uday Kumar in the first episode of C4C Conversations, which brought us from the very beginning to the 16th century, today we focus on two aspects of the city's itihasa, the Pete and the Kote. Yashaswini Sharma, a Bengalurian by heart and soul, is leading us through this journey today. Well, having spent my childhood in the beedis of one of the Petes, Kapan Pete, I am eagerly looking forward to know more about all the Petes and Kotes of Bengaluru. ಬನ್ನಿ, ನಾವು ನೀವು ಜೊತೆಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಪೇಟೆ ಮತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಕೋಟೆಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಣ. ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತ.
Thanks, Raj. I request all of you to please mute your audio, and you have the option to mute your video too. Should you have any queries, please feel free to post it in the chat mode, and we will address to a select few at the end of this presentation. Apart from the chat mode, if there is any query we can take, C4C member Sonal Kulkarni will moderate them at the end of this session. So now, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin our journey today, let me introduce Yashaswini Sharma. And it gives me immense pleasure to get this opportunity to introduce to you Yashaswini Sharma. She is a practicing architect, academician, author, and researcher. She completed her MPhil in architectural research from Welsh School of Architecture, UK. Her focus has been on heritage architecture and conservation. Through her practice in the name of aesthetic architects, she is collaborating with Professor Adam Hardy of Cardiff University on a unique temple project at Venkatapura in Kolar district. This temple will be built in the ornate Hoysala style. Yashaswini has done extensive fieldwork and has measured drawings of Chalukya and Hoysala temples for the AHRC funded Indian Temple Project. She has been an examiner, a juror, and guest lecturer in various architectural engineering colleges. She is a member of International Council on Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS India. She has also been at the forefront of community driven initiatives to secure tangible heritage of Bengaluru city through EA Samarakshane, a conservation program initiated by aesthetic architects. For example, the pro bono design of a mantapa in Ganga style of architecture to house the recently discovered 8th century inscription in Hebbala, which is nearing its completion, and the heritage documentation of the 17th century Kote Venkataramana Swami Temple in Kalasipalya, Bangalore. Yashaswini is the recipient of many awards for her work. Happy to inform you that just earlier this month she was conferred the Nada Prabhu Kempegowda Award of 2020 for Heritage Conservation. Yashaswini is the author of the book Bangalore, the Early City AD 1537 to 1799, which traces the development of our city, focusing on the architecture and the settlement pattern of its earliest urban area, the Pete and the Oval Fort, the Kote. The Pete and the Kote are a very significant part of Bengaluru's story. And continuing the C4C conversation where we left it off in the previous episode, it is appropriate now to focus on these to understand our city better. I request Yashaswini to take us through our Pete and Kote. Over to you, Yashaswini.
Thank you, Rajkumar Dugar, Sonal Kunkani, and C4C for hosting this talk. As I understand, there has been an earlier lecture which covered the history of this region until about the 16th century. Nevertheless, I'll just do a brief introduction and then we can go into today's topic, which is Bengaluru's Pete and Kote. I think from earlier lecture, you are familiar with the regions, the localities, the settlements and lakes which had come up until about 16th century, as well as the evidence that is there in the form of inscription stones all around the region, which is presently Bengaluru, which is in the Bengaluru boundary. Now, briefly, I'll just go through the various dynasties which ruled over this region before 16th century. It was the Ganga who ruled here, and then Nolamba Pallavas for a brief period in some portion, and Cholas from 10th to 12th century, then Hoysalas when there was an expansion of the area of settlement as well as a number of lakes came up. And then we have the Karnataka Empire, more popularly known as Vijayanagara Empire, but that is actually wrong because Vijayanagara is just the capital of this empire. It is not the entire empire. So coming to Ganga period, why I'm starting with the Ganga period is that the earliest evidence of the place name Bengaluru is found from this particular period. Back then, the region was under Gangavadi, which was ruled by Gangas, and it was Gangavadi 96,000. 96,000 meaning the number of administrative settlements which were there. So it was that big a region. And Gangas were ruling over this region. So the inscription that was found in the Begur temple complex in the floor of the mandapa in front of Kamadeshwara temple, it mentions Battle of Bengaluru, which means Bengaluru existed back then, and it was sufficiently large enough for it to be entered into an inscription as an identification point. So, what it records is the demise or the heroic feat of one Buddhana Shetty. But what we get from this is that Bengaluru existed in 9th century, and it should have been around for quite some time. Later mentions we see a Bengaluru in about 13th century and a copper plate inscription which is slightly disputed. Now in the photograph that you see, the letters marked in blue, that says Bengalura. And this is the temple complex, the Nageshwara and Nagareshwara temples being the oldest. This is the Begur temple complex where it was found. In the same period, we have recently discovered a 750 AD inscription which mentions Hebbala as Perbulal Nadu Muvattu. That means it was an administrative center for about 30 settlements. So this has been now safely secured in a Ganga Mantapa, in a Mantapa of Ganga style. So later, this region was in the province called Vikrama Chola Mandala under the Cholas. The Cholas had a slightly different administrative system. They started with the king, of course, and then the Yuvaraja, who was also called Mahamandalika, was ruling over all, was coordinating all the mandalams. Under him were the Mandalikas who were governing mandalams. And then you have got the Chaturvedi Mangalams, the Puras, the Aries, Kottams, and Nadus. So this administrative setup continued even in Hoysala period. And later we come to the point of interest for the stock, 16th century and later, when this was, the region was governed by Kempe Gowda. Now Kempe Gowda was administrating over 12 hoblis, including Bengaluru. From this period, Bengaluru was under various patronages. One was the Gaudas, the Palegars of Yelahanka. Then it was under Bijapur Sultanate. Bijapur Sultanate led an army was led by Ranadullah Khan, and they invested Bengaluru. And Bengaluru was gifted as a Jagir to Shaji, who happens to be Shivaji's brother. Then it was invested by Mughals for about a period of 3 years. Then Wadiyars, Chikadevaraja Wadiyar happens to buy Bengaluru for a sum of 3 lakh rupees, and their reign starts. And Hyder Ali is given Bengaluru as a Jagir by the Wadiyar king. Later, Tipu Sultan succeeds, and after the third Mysore war, after the third Anglo-Mysore war, the rule is reverted back to Wadiyars, wherein cantonment is a city-state. Post-independence, of course, we know that it is the capital of the new state of Karnataka. So the question is, why did Kempe Gowda decide to establish a merchant town when there was an old city called Bengaluru, and he was governing over Yelahanka Nadu, which was in the possession of his ancestors from early 15th century. So he is the great grandson of Jaya Gowda. So when he has a fairly good setup, why would he try and seek to invest? Because establishing a patent requires capital. So why would a Palagar do that is the first question. Next is how, and next is when. The when is established from an inscription dating back from the inscription informed in Padapete. So we think that he established the market town around 1537 AD. Now the why has various reasons attached to it. It could be also because of the placement of this region in the peninsula. If you look at the peninsular map, Bengaluru happens to be right in the center of peninsula, and any trader who wanted to move from port to port, whether from Mangaluru to Rameshwaram, they had to pass through this region. And the evidence that this was hosting traders is found as early as Roman period. We have Roman coins, which have been found from 51 AD and so on. They have been found in Yeshwanthpura railway station and where it is now, and HJL area, etc. So we do know that this was a point of trade not just for local traders but also international trade. So one of the reasons could be that the traders were passing through this Bengaluru, but they were not actually entering within the taxable limits. And probably in order to provide a more secure environment and also to get them into an area which can be taxed and revenue generated was the idea. Now, the ideal place for this is chosen because it is surrounded by all these hill forts, which offer a first line of defense in case there is a invading army coming in. So they could always sound the alarm. You can see that various durgas are marked as drugs over here, Ramgiri Durga, and you've got Savan Durga, etc. And you see all these durgas surrounding what is the Bengaluru Pete. Of course, this map is from a later period, so even the Kote is depicted over here. And then the Pete was itself designed. We believe there was a bound hedge also surrounding Bengaluru. So you have two sets of lines of defense already for this particular Pete. So one thing is defense, second thing is placement, the region, and third thing is to get them all together so as to generate revenue. Now that it was a successful enterprise, we know because the yield of 12 hoblis for Kempegowda in terms of revenue was about 30,000 varahas or pagodas, which is a large sum at that time. This emboldens him to start minting his own coins in the name of Bairadeva, his family deity until then. Subsequently gets arrested by the emperor, spends 5 years in Anegundi only to be released during the Battle of Talikota, after which Gowdas stay loyal to the throne throughout. Even after the emperor loses to the Bahmani sultans, they remain loyal. And this also marks Kempegowda's shift from the family deity Bairadeva to Shaivism. He starts patronizing all the Shaiva temples within the Pete. Now, this is the earliest evidence, cartography, that we find of the Pete and Kote, and this is dated to 18th century, 1791. This was drawn up by a person called Robert Home, basically to aid the plan of the attacks on the Pete and Kote. So at that time, the map was drawn up. Now we are assuming that during these 2 centuries, the Pete hadn't changed that much based on some documentation. So stating that this was as is in 16th century, an analysis of Pete has been done by me. And to understand how it was done, I look to Indian canonical texts such as Manasara and Mayamata, which are town planning treatises, dated to about 6th century. They are supposed to be from Varaha Mihira's period, when Brihad Samhita was written down. So there is a mandala type, Nigama and the Pattana typology, market town, which tallies with the Pete. And this is the mandala which I found to be closest to the layout of the Pete. Now observe the number of gates and the number of sewage gates. The number of gates are 8. The number of sewage gates are 4. They're all arranged around the central place called Brahma. There is a Mangala Viti. And there is a place set for, the bazaar of rice, set for the bazaar for clothes, etc. Now, this is in the northwest and this is the southwest. Just remember this when we go into the Pete plan. I'll come back to that later. Now, if we go into the Pete plan, we can see that Akki Pete is right where it should be, where rice was being sold. That is the northwest sector. And Arale Pete, there is a cotton where clothes were sold. That is exactly in the southwest portion. So we know that somebody with the knowledge of this canonical text had planned this. And this pete is composed of number of sub-petes. So Akki and Arle are just two. There are umpteen numbers like Dodda Pete, Deshit Pete, Chik Pete, etc. etc. So the pete was designed in the proportion of 1:2. It had a circumference of about 5 kilometers at the time that it was drawn. And the way it was planned out or delineated is described as two bullocks were meditated upon and set to delineate or mark out the extreme boundaries. Now, this method is common to Indian and Etruscan methods. There, it's common. So what happens is they meditate on the bullocks as the sun and the moon, and they set out the delineation. So the principal axes are the north-south and east-west axis. One running from Yelahanka Gate to Anekal Gate is the north-south, and then one running from Halsur Gate is the east-west axis. And they meet in the center. This is a cross-axial plan, which is also called as Kartari Dandaka plan. Now, this was set within, surrounded by hill forts, so it is a Karvata typology for us. So all these things are actually mentioned in the treatises, and that is how the pete was laid out. What we can observe from this plan, this is a regenerated plan which is based on Holmes' drawing, is that there is an outer ring of fortification and an inner ring of fortification. There is a Mangal Veedi all around. There's a moat around the pete as well, which joins into the Dharmambudi Kere over there. There is a little bit of a story surrounding this laying of the fortification and the installation of gates, especially relating to the Anekal Gate. So the story goes that the gate was not standing despite many efforts, and an astrologer tells Kempe Gowda that a pregnant woman has to be sacrificed for the gate to stand. Now, Kempe Gowda happens to be a progressive man for the age. He would have stopped mutilation of the second toe, the mid toe, of unmarried girls in the family, a practice which had continued in other communities and finally banned during Vadir. So he doesn't agree. He says no. What happens is that his daughter-in-law would be pregnant at that time. So she takes it upon herself to redeem this situation, and she sacrifices herself. Her name is Lakshmama, and a temple to her was dedicated by Kempe Gowda, which still exists in Koramangala. So that is the story which is of the installation of Anekal Gate associated with the establishment of the pete. Now here, if we use more modern urban design methods to read the pete, Kevin Lynch's theory is most commonly used because it makes sense to apply that over here. He kind of reads the city in terms of the boundaries, paths, districts, landmarks, and nodes. Now here, if you look at boundary, the fortification itself is the boundary. The main paths or axes are the north, south, and east-west axis. If you look at districts, if you want to call them districts, the sub-petes themselves are districts. Our landmarks are mostly sacred landmarks. The temples and the mosque and the dargah are what are remaining now. So those are our landmarks. There also are sacred nodes, and even the lakes are our sacred nodes. So the way a pete was designed is that a particular commodity was being traded in that sub-pete, and the pete was named after it. The people who were trading in that commodity settled over there, and there was usually a temple which was associated with the deity they were worshipping. So if you take the example, if you look at all these petes, Anche pete, Arle pete, Chik pete, Dod pete, there are various goods which are associated. For example, Ganigas are oil presses, and that is where Ganigas were staying, and a temple to Chanigaraya exists over there. And even the Gana is worshipped. So, like that, there are a number of petes which are within the main Bangalore pete. The fortification, we have a drawing, and the documentation by European historians says it's a mud fort. But neither the Gaudas of Yelahanka, the Palegas, nor Vadias ever built mud forts, because to build a mud fort in 16th century would be very short-sighted. Gunpowder had already come in and people were using cannons. And to build a mud fort next to a lake is even more difficult than building a stone fort. So we are assuming it's a stone fort, but it had glacis on it. And you can see that the high edge within the boundary. You don't see the outer fortification. What you're actually seeing is the inner fortification in this particular drawing. So this is one of the photographs in 19th century which shows Avenue Road with a lot of coconut trees, etc. I'm just showing this so that there's an idea of the typology of houses which were there, both flat and thatch roof. Now this is from a photograph of the fort. It is derived from it. You can see a lot of flat roof structures, some amount of thatch, and a lot of coconut trees. So this is probably where it was opening into Siddhikata, and the outer fortification was already lost. Coming to the boundary towers, what are called boundary towers, they're actually watchtowers, and they were erected by Kempegowda II, Himmadi Kempegowda. So there are a number of watchtowers. There are 4 which are quite famous with regard to Bengaluru. One from Halasuru Lake. The other one is near Sankey Tank. It's on a higher plane. It's near Meghni Circle. Then there is the one on Lalbagh, the Nice Rock, Hillock, and there's of course the Kempambudikere Tower. So these 4 are quite usually mentioned because they are in the cardinal directions. So, and the theory was that they were setting out the boundary of the pete. I don't think it's the boundary of the pete. Now this was also a line of defense, because a warning system from one of the hill forts has to be intercepted by someone, has to be seen by someone and conveyed to the pete, which is why these watchtowers were there. So it was to actually convey this warning signal that these watchtowers were constructed. Now if you look on the left hand side, that is called a Tiruvalikalu. It's a donation stone marking the boundary of a sacred place, of a temple. And these are Chola boundary stones. So there are types of boundary stones which can be identified. There are Gokalus also, which set limits. But this is not a boundary aspect. This is a watchtower. So within the present limits, if you have to zoom in to see the pete and the kote, a little bit of kote can be made out. With regard to pete, there's another special thing. Now we were talking about different communities trading in different commodities, and the pete is being set for them, and the temple also being located. One of the famous temples is the Dharmaraya temple. You don't find many temples dedicated to Yudhishthira. And there is a community called Tigalas. They call themselves Vannikula Kshatriyas. They were born out of Draupadi's hair, is what they say. Now, the festival of Bengaluru is actually Karaga. And why this kind of importance was attached to Karaga is explained by the profession of Tigalas. Tigalas were horticulturists, and they were also maintaining the water supply system, which is why they were celebrated. They were maintaining the lakes. Now, if you look at the festival itself, it sort of highlights the bond of the earth and water. Earlier, it was said that an earth mound was taken from the Sampangi tank, and he would jump right onto the breeze, and he would carry it in the Karaga. And it is actually taken from Sampangi Kere. But now, of course, the Kere doesn't exist. There's a small water body which is left for the sacred aspect. So they say they carry water around, but they do visit all the lakes. They go around the boundary. They go to the sacred nodes, which are the outer, the Kote Anjaneya, the all those Kote temples. But there's also a special bond between the Dharmaraya temple and the Tavkal Mastan Dargah. Why this came about? There are two versions to it. One highlights one community, other highlights another community. It is said that the Karaga couldn't move until it was blessed by Tavkal Mastan Dargah. There's a similar version from the other side. But what takes place right now, the practice is that the Karaga moves from Dharmaraya temple, goes to Tavkal Mastan Dargah, and then goes around. So, in a beautiful way, both two communities have found that they can interact and bind themselves in this city festival, and they can have a relationship between two communities. So I think that is what is beautiful about Bengaluru Karaga. Karaga happens in other places also, but this is what is special about Bengaluru Karaga. So this is the boundary that the Karaga takes around the Pete. Coming to the Kote itself, again we look to Robert Holmes' plan and his drawings. This is a drawing of the Pete. You can see of the Kote. You can see the entire Kote, which is set on a higher mount than the Pete. You can see some amount of thatch roof and this dome, which is of the Sangin Jama Masjid. I think the masjid itself was just a 10 by 10 structure, which was constructed for the ease of prayers for the Mughal soldiers, I think, because they were here only for about 3 years. So you are looking at the Kote from the Pete. So what you are actually seeing over here is the Delhi Gate, and then you see the Oval Fort over there. So this is a regeneration of the Oval Fort. Now this typology can also be deciphered from Indian canonical texts. It resembles a Jaladurga, only the water body around it is not a river, it is a moat. So there are two stages of fortification here as well. There is this internal fortification, the stronger fortification, and there is a post prayer at a lower height. And this moat, it comes from, you remember the moat around the Pete that flows into the Siddhikate. It feeds into the moat of the Oval Fort, and then it flows out into Karanjikere and so on. So there's an entire network there by gradient. So inside the Kote itself, if you look at the placement of the palace and the temple, you see that it is in the southwest portion of the center. The center is always called the Brahma. This is actually Kubera Mole, so it is quite apt for the palace to be there, and quite apt for the royal temple to be set west of the Brahmasthana. And we looked at it closely, the placement of the temple and the palace. There was a lot of armory and ammunition was stored around this particular complex. So this was a citadel. Later on, roads were forged through it, and which is why we don't see much of it. What is remaining now is 1/3 of this fort, which is this 1/3 of this Delhi Gate, which is this little portion which is remaining, which is next to Victoria Hospital. So this is a photograph from 1850s of the Kote. You can see the dry moat here, and the earlier photograph that I showed of the house typology, the residence, the typology of residences is taken from this particular photograph. So another photograph here, the moat is filled and you see the bastions of the Oval Fort. So this is a portion which is remaining of the Delhi Gate, including Sir David Baird's dungeon and we have got about 3 set of gates, 1, 2, and 3 remaining. Whereas originally it had 2 more courtyards and there were 4 more gates. Though there were 7 gates, it was all on the same level. So military records say that if there were ditches and if there were ups and downs, it would have been more difficult entrance. But whereas once we gained entry, we could easily get into the fort because it was on the same level. So this is the remaining portion of the Delhi Gate. You can still see the stucco work from when it was improved by Kiledar Ibrahim Khan in about 1761, I think. So this is the internal courtyard. That's gate number 3. There's a little bit of inscription on the other side. So you see the Delhi Gate. You don't see all this now, and you see Mysore Gate, which is completely lost. You can see the flag of Tipu Sultan flying high there. Showing aerial view of the Devanhalli fort, just to give you an idea of what the shape would have been like. It's a place where Tipu Sultan was born, and there's a memorial to it. But he was born outside the fort, not inside. And this is the gate. Now, this doesn't allow an elephant to pass, but Bengaluru Kote allows an elephant to pass. It is that high. So, what is the architecture? Though I am not going to dwell too much on the architecture of the place, because I've also been warned not to just talk about it, but to give a general idea of the Pete. What can be said is that the surviving temples which are there, they are provincial versions of the Karnataka or Vijayanagara architecture. The temples from Vijayanagara, and the columns are composite in manner. Now, I'll explain what composite columns are. They had figural additions or colonnade additions. Smaller columns are added onto it, or figures like horses or lions added to it. Now, this was done whenever there was an open mantapa to create a dramatic effect. If it is a Buddha mantapa, there isn't too much use of having composite columns. In an open mantapa, you see that conveyed in a very dramatic effect. Tipu Sultan Palace, etc. Though it is planned on Shivapanayaka Palace, actually Shira Palace, but Sira Palace was planned after Shivapanayaka Palace. So there is that resemblance. Only here we see Islamic motifs. Houses, of course, we have discussed that they were either flat roofed or thatched. The source of water supply to the Pete for the northwestern areas, it was from Dharmambudikere, and for the northeastern areas, it was from Sampangikere. The sewage was all collected into a single channel and let out near Sunkalkere, about 3 miles, and applied to agricultural fields. So you have a kind of a sustainable model. What is in vogue now to discuss existed back then. So coming to the temples, this is, of course, the Venkatramana Swami temple, Alasuru Someshwara temple. You can see the kind of effect these composite columns cause. Unfortunately, there's a concrete structure covering this now. And you have horse warrior composite columns in the Ranganatha Swami temple, which is there in Mutyalapete. That is also the temple where we have an inscription from this Kempegowda II's period. Now, aside from that, we of course have Gavi Gangadhareshwara temple, the Harihara temple, where you find the Chola boundary stone, the Tiruvalikal that I showed earlier. You've got Doddabasava temple, which marks the birth of Rishabhavati river. And this is an old photograph of the Dharmaraya Swami temple. It is modified now, and a little modified. Coming to the palace and temple complex, which I was talking about earlier. What I observed from the map is that the entrance to the temple was actually from within the palace, and it was an eastern entrance. And it was set in the inner prakara, or the inner compound. And there was an outer compound which had this the parade ground. What this actually conveys is that it is a royal temple. This temple was actually built by Chikkadevaraja Vadiyar. The fort was also built by him, improved upon later during in about 1761. So what we can assume is that there was an older bungalow over here, or a larger mansion, where the king's representative or the Jagidar or whoever was in charge of looking after, administrating the Pete and Kote on the behalf of the king would stay. And this is a Sri Vaishnavite temple. And Vadiyars are Sri Vaishnavite. So the installation of Venkatramana Swami is not surprising. And there is an inscription by Mukarasu, or Chikkadevaraja Vadiyar's son. His inscription is in Kothunur, and it gives manya of 4 villages for this particular temple's maintenance. So that way we know that this deity was installed by Chikkadevaraja Vadiyar. Now there's some discrepancy about when that there was an earlier structure over here. Now what we can say is that it has got 2 types of plinth or adhisthana. One is a very simple one, the other one is a slightly more decorative one. So we think that there was a smaller mantapat over here, which was improved upon and extended and converted into a temple proper by Chikkadevaraja Vadiyar. So I'll just show you some of the drawings very quickly. This is an elevation of the Kote Venkatramana Swami temple and a section. The different types of columns which are there in the temple. Now, what we have to really pay attention to is this column. It has got 4 lion astride warriors springing out from all 4 sides of the pillar. Now, this is very unique to the temples that Chikkadevaraja Vadiyar built. So we know for sure that this was his patronage. So this is one of the 4 columns which are there inside the mandapa. This is the temple, and the last photograph shows you the column that I was, or pillar that I was just mentioning. Halasur Someshwara temple is of course quite old. Again, it is believed that the earlier portion, just the Garbhagriha portion itself, could have come up during Chola times. We are very sure about it. But the later development was, of course, during Kempegowda's period. Coming back to the other religious structure, I did speak about Sangin Jama Masjid, which is the first mosque which came up in the Pete when Mughals were holding sway over Pete, over Bengaluru. At that particular point of time, what was constructed was just a 10 by 10 structure. Now that is designated or marked by these 4 columns over here. Now, except for the mihrab, I think also slightly modified later, and it has been expanded. It also hosts a school now. What is really nice is that inside the Pete, there's so much dialogue between communities, and it's such a settled atmosphere. You can almost walk in and ask about history and talk to various people over here. The dome was damaged during the Third Mysore War. It was because the manufacturing unit of Mysore rockets developed by Tipu Sultan, that was located just next to the masjid in what was later called as Taramandala Pete during Tipu's period. So the British or East India Company was the soldiers were aiming for the manufacturing units when they, I think, hit Sangin Jama Masjid. So there was a crack to the dome and it was improved upon by Mekri. The palace, Tipu's palace, was built quite later, and by the time it was constructed, the Third Mysore War happened in 1791, and Hyder and Tipu hardly lived over here. But it's a beautiful edifice. Not all of it remains. One section is lost now. The western wing is there, the eastern wing is not there. There's a private Darbar hall and a public Darbar hall and a beautiful gallery overlooking the Darbar halls. And this is where Tipu would have come and met the people. But I doubt how many months he was actually here. After the Third Mysore War, he actually ends up dismantling the entire fort and it is put together by Purnaya. Probably that was the time the Ganesha temple came up. We don't know. But Vishweshwaraya and Ramakrishna Rao, when they do a survey for Nalvadi's, during Nalvadi's time, they say that the Ganesha temple is a new structure and doesn't go with the heritage structures of the fort. But now it is a ASI designated temple. Whereas Venkatramana Swami temple is not. Even Tipu Palace is. So it's a little strange because this predates the others. So a view of the parade grounds and of the palace as it was at the end or the close of 18th century. You can see the the Garuda Gamba of the temple, and you can see the entrance into the parade ground and the gallery from which soldiers could be watched or would be watched by Tipu. And this is the eastern wing, which no longer exists. So this is another painting which shows the street entrance into the palace area. We can only kind of regenerate or think about how the parade ground was. The parade ground is where Bangalore Medical College and others have now. This is a drawing of Tipu Palace. You can see the fluted or cusped arches and the tall columns, the wooden columns. There's beautiful fresco, gilded art on the walls in the palace. I think some amount of restoration work has been done recently by ASI, and they do have an office within the palace complex. And a painting showing what the Galal Bagh was like. You can see the tower over here. It's got different kind of a dome and all these cypress trees and fruit trees. It was about, the extent was about 25 acres back then, and then it grew 10 times and over during British residency and later warrior rule. Some photographs showing Lal Bagh and the extent now. After the third Mysore, after the fourth Mysore War, rather, the boundary after the third Mysore was 1792. Mysore boundary was resettled amongst various parties which invested the kingdom, and this yellow bit is the boundary that you see in all the maps that you saw earlier from Rice's Mysore Gazette, showing the Ganga period and the Chola period, etc. That corresponded to this particular boundary. That is what you saw in all those maps earlier. So post this war, of course, Bangalore, the cantonment was moved from Srirangapatna to Bengaluru, and the move happened somewhere in 1809. It came to be, but the move was contemplated in 1806, and we usually get a story that the soldiers preferred the army, the East India Company army preferred the climate of Bengaluru because it was a salubrious climate and they wanted to shift, and there was a problem of mosquitoes and malaria in Srirangapatna. Now, a post war scene isn't actually a very healthy scene, so obviously there will be a lot of trouble, there will be a lot of health problems, but more than that, there was a revolt within the ranks which hastened the move of the army from Srirangapatna to Bengaluru, and cantonment was set up, and it was administered by the British until rendition. Then it was a civil and military station, and it was a separate corporation. So there were two corporations in Bengaluru, which was the Pete, Kote, and the palace and those sections, and the other one was the cantonment section. It was reverted back after being assigned as an assigned track. It was reverted back just before independence. So this is the plan of the cantonment, which has come up over here. You still see the Pete and the Kote on the left side. So Cubbon Park, which is laid out, it came as a buffer between the Pete and the Kote and the cantonment. So whoever had any local who was servicing, was giving service, providing service work for the cantonment had to take a ticket, pass through Cubbon Park, and do whatever work was to be done and return back by evening. This was a kind of, I would say, a semi-apartheid situation over here. And where the old toll gate was is where town hall stands today. This map is especially useful to look at all the lakes which were there within Bengaluru region. You see n number of lakes, and you see the network of Raja Kaluways connecting one lake to the other. Bengaluru was known for its rainwater harvesting, which is sadly not the case anymore. Later on, of course, extensions happened. Among the first extensions were the Chamrajpete extension and the Shisharipuram extension, which came up. Later on, Malleshwaram and Baswanagudi came up. I won't dwell too much into it. But what we see in all this is that the north-south axis that we observed from Yelahanka Gate to Anekal Gate, it continues to hold sway over the entire layout of the city. And even our inner and outer ring roads, if you look closely at it in the transport maps, you see that they're almost circumambulating the Pete and taking the same shape. So that concludes this talk. If there are any questions, I would like to take them now.
Thank you, Yashaswini. There are a few questions here. I'll just ask them. Why was the water source not important? After all, every important city is either built on the banks of a river or where a river is close by. So why Bangalore has to depend on tanks, that too which was dug up manually?
That's a good question. Water source is important. I didn't say it is not important. Now, there is a water system here, but we did not have perennial rivers running. And even if you look at how medieval towns were planned, they never drew water from the river. They always went in for their fresh water source. That was a healthier option, to have a lake to irrigate a farmland and not to convey it from a distance. Even when it was on a riverbed, say for example, take Hampi itself, even though it is the banks of Tungabhadra, you actually have freshwater sources within for the city. Whereas the sewage and whatever waste is actually filtered and let into the river. This was a practice even in Harappan times. So the earlier practice, before the construction of huge dams, was to rely upon freshwater resource, store the rainwater, and use that. And this was always connected. The lakes were connected. One lake was connected to the other, and the gradient was itself used to recharge the river as well. So in a way, they are actually recharging rivers and keeping them healthy too.
Thank you. Priyank also asks, how did Hyder Tipu react vis-a-vis all the temples in and around Bangalore that has been shown in today's presentation?
The temples within the city itself, Kotte Venkataramana Swami temple, Tipu is supposed to have prayed there before battle. And he was also attached to it because the Garuda Gamba of the temple took a cannon which is meant for him in the palace. So he was, I think, grateful for that. Now, within Bengaluru itself, there wasn't any kind of, there wasn't a big issue. But in nearby areas like Kolar, like Kudumalai, which is now called Kurudamalai because all the temples were destroyed by Hyder and Tipu, or in case of Melkote, where people loyal to Wadiyars were there, that was ransacked, and a number of families also lost lives. So within Bengaluru itself, there wasn't that much of an issue. And as far as Kotte Venkatramana Swami temple itself is concerned, Tipu is supposed to have taken blessings over there.
The other question that is asked is Halasuru Someshwara temple is in the east, and the Pete has a Halasuru gate. So, what is the relationship between these two and its distance?
Well, the gate is actually named after the place it opened to. If you look at Yelahanka Gate or Anekal Gate, it is the same logic. It is opening to Halasuru, which was earlier called Palasuru. There are inscriptions for that as well. So it is opening to that region, and that is why the gate is named after it. Now, who named it, we don't know. We see these names coming up in Holmes' plan. We are assuming that it was so before too.
And one last question, Yashaswini. So, Kishore asks, Bengaluru was known as the AC city, and he wants to know if this was the same during those times.
Well, we can only speculate. I don't have meteorological data for that. But yes, of course, we are a hill station of sorts. So I don't think there was much difference in the weather. They're actually ruining it. So we are having a higher temperature now in the summers. It wasn't this high back then. Even if I go back to my student days, it was much cooler in the summers.
Thank you, Yashaswini. Thanks a lot. And thank you everyone for attending this event. And I hand it over to Sneha for the closing.
Thank you.
I'm sure people like Raj, who have spent their childhood in Bengaluru's Petes, did not know all of this. Someone has to be very interested to learn, to have the right skills and the time to do all the research, to have the energy and the passion to spread this valuable knowledge to us, the common people, so that we get to know our surroundings a little bit better. Only then I feel can we do something to improve our surroundings, which is what C4C's motto is. On behalf of all of you and on behalf of C4C, I, Sneha Maheshwari, thank Yashaswini Sharma for today's journey. The Pete and Kotte, as we all have learned, are like the heart of Namma City. Today, we are an enlightened lot, thanks to Yashaswini. Before we close, I thank all of you for taking the time out and attending this presentation today. Please do make sure that more and more Bengalurians here and all over the world watch these programs on C4C's YouTube channel. Let's all get on with life, take all the necessary precautions, stay healthy, stay safe, and leave our surroundings a little better than we found it. Thank you. Namaskara.